Welcome to our webinar, Childhood Anxiety, 5 Strategies to Help Children Cope. My name is Tammy Schmoon. I'm a registered child psychologist, a registered play therapist, and the co-founder of the Institute of Child Psychology. Thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy lives to join me. I realize how scary this is and frustrating this is for many of you who work with children or have a child or teen at home that is struggling with anxiety. And you're not alone in that. 1 in 8 children in Canada, for instance, suffers with qualifiable anxiety disorder. Anxiety is the number 1 mental health concern in children. So again, you're not alone in that, and you should commend yourself for taking this first step to getting your child some help and to get informed on how to help them. I have lots of resources for you and give you some really great ideas to get started on this. And maybe you're wondering what makes me qualified to teach this webinar. My clinical specialty is working with children. I have been working with children and teens in a mental health capacity for the last 10 years. And my specialty is post-traumatic stress disorder, trauma, a smaller form of PTSD, and anxiety. So that's typically what I work with. I'm also a former elementary teacher, so if any of you are teachers and you're dealing with this in your classroom, I've seen this work for teachers as well. And I'm a parent. I have 3 kids at home. I have an 11-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 3-year-old. One of them has anxiety and has struggled, and all 3 of my kids have struggled with mild amounts of anxiety at some point in their childhood so far. But I think what most importantly qualifies me to bring this material to you is, as a child, I had debilitating anxiety in the form of panic attacks, in the form of chewing my nails, of skin picking, school avoidance, nightmares, bedwetting. The list goes on and on and on, but it was difficult for my parents as they tell me about what it was like with me when I was young. They tell me about how helpless they felt. And I don't want any parent to feel that way about working with their child to try to help their child who is struggling with this. So what we're going to do today is we're going to be looking at some different strategies that you can help with your child. We're going to talk about where anxiety comes from in children. We are going to talk about really what anxiety is. We are going to talk a little bit about how it works in the body, how it impacts kids' ability to think and our ability to lead them. And then I'm going to give you some concrete tools you can take home starting today that I really anticipate is going to help you start to get this under wraps. So what is anxiety? It's that thing that drives us crazy and keeps us up all night, right? Really, it's about your child or you or the children you work with feeling like something bad is going to happen. There's some uncertain outcome. And this can come in so many forms. It could come in the form of a tantrum. It could come in the form of racing thoughts at night. It could come with bedwetting, headaches, tummy aches, hyperactivity, even aggression. Children, when we get into the fight, flight, freeze, collapse response, that's going to make a little bit more sense why anxious kids can be really aggressive kids. And not always, but it is the way that some kids deal with having anxiety. And I hope this slide makes a little bit of sense to you. Whenever I show this picture to parents when I teach this course live, there's always a chuckle, a soft chuckle, but laughing in the room. Because all of us know who are caregivers that the most debilitating feeling in the world, the most anxiety-provoking thing in the world is watching your child suffer and not being able to do anything about it. You feel completely shamed, that you feel deficient as a caregiver. You feel embarrassed. You feel that it's futile, you can't do anything, and we feel horrible about ourselves as caregivers that we're not doing our job properly. So then our inability to help our kids makes us feel anxious, and then it becomes like the blind leading the blind. So what I'm hoping you're going to take from this webinar are some tools. So maybe you're feeling a little more competent about your ability to help your child, and maybe you know what direction to go in. Now, I want you to know that a lot of what we give in this webinar and also in our full course or anything else the Institute teaches is we always preface that whatever goes on in our mind happens in the body first. Typically, almost every time we have an anxiety in our body, we have a reaction. And our central nervous system interprets what's going on and sends that information up to our brain, and our brain decides. It looks at the memories that are in there, past experiences, and says, well, do I need to be upset about this? Do I need to be angry? Do I need to be scared? Should I be happy? Should I be excited? And the brain interprets. Also know that this happens in the heart, meaning it's about relationship. And when we're dealing with anxiety, we have to understand that children's ability to regulate often depends on where their heart is. Meaning if they are not in a good relationship with someone, they have a very difficult time regulating their body. So first and foremost, we're going to look at changing what's happening in the body, and then the brain can start to change how it interprets the information. And two, we're always going to ensure that our relationship with our child or the child we're working with is in its best tip-top shape. We want to ensure the child feels safe and feels heard and doesn't feel under threat, or it's really difficult to work through the emotion. Dr. Gordon Neufeld says that we cannot lead children whose hearts we cannot hold, who we do not hold. We have to be able to hold the hearts of our kids so they feel safe, so we can move them through their anxiety and move them to a place of resiliency and health. So that's going to be a really important part of this journey for you. We're going to look now at some myths on anxiety. So there are two important myths I want to debunk before we start giving you some concrete strategies to go through this. First and foremost is you should be able to control a child's anxiety. Well, I don't know about you. I've got 3 kids at home, and I have learned this the hard way, that while we can lead and while we can teach, we cannot control a child. We can try, but it really usually doesn't end very well in our favor. So our goal instead is to act as a thermostat, not a thermometer, which means we want to respond to these kids versus react to these kids. We already have a reactive child, and an anxious child is a reactive child. So we want to ensure that we stay grounded and we choose how we respond. We can't control how a child responds to us. However, we have control over how we respond, and we have control in terms of what we can change about the environment that we raise these kids, that we school these kids, the care we give them. We can change that. And we also want to work on the relationship. Remember, it's all grounded in attachment. I train a lot of psychologists, and one of the things I always tell my interns and my provisional psychologists and my beginning play therapists is, while there is techniques and while there are theoretical orientation and there are various theoretical orientations, and while there are things like client readiness to change, all these different factors that makes therapy efficient, there's efficacy in what you're doing. The number one, 70 to 75% of the reason clients get better in counseling has to do with relationship. So while I'm going to give you concrete tools to deal with anxiety in kids, please understand that without a good attachment, without good relationship, without a safe relationship, a responsive relationship, an attuned relationship, and we'll talk about attunement shortly, the anxiety won't get better because that child doesn't feel safe. And part of the reason they're anxious is because of it's a lack of physiological, as they feel, and psychological safety for a variety of reasons. It could be the environment, could be the relationship, could be certain circumstances, but the child just doesn't feel safe. Myth number 2 is that anxiety is bad and we should be anxiety free. And I am sure you've heard this in the news. that 90 to 95% of disease is all related to stress. And while stress, we know, is not good for memory, it's not good for blood pressure, it's not good for the heart, for many different things, that it is responsible for our bodies breaking down a lot of the time. That is to the extreme version. As it turns out, stress in moderate to low amounts is very good for us. It keeps us safe, it protects us, because it keeps us from doing the things that we shouldn't do and holds us accountable to do the things that we should. So it also keeps us with good company. It tells us that we should look twice before crossing the road. It's why you get up in the morning a lot of the time to go to a job maybe you're not always crazy about, but you know you have to pay the mortgage and put your kids in hockey or basketball or football. So it's important we do have some stress hormones, which are called cortisol and adrenaline, in our bodies. They are highly motivating in terms of our achievements and our ability, or even our willingness to take this webinar to be a better parent or professional in terms of helping a child who is struggling. Cortisol and adrenaline showed up in order for you to show up. So again, we don't want to get rid of this, just like we don't want to numb out or tune out any of our emotions. Mother Nature designed us with emotions for something called biofeedback. It tells us what our environment is like, and it tells us what kind of company we should keep. It tells us if we're safe or not. It tells us if we are happy. It gives us contrast. So we want all of our emotions absolutely intact. So there's a slide really quick on how anxiety serves a purpose. So again, the reason I bring this up is, one, we want to teach kids this, that anxiety keeps you safe. It's the alarm, the fire alarm in your body and in your brain that smells if there's a fire that we need to call 911. So it can be a big helper. And again, so we want to teach kids this. We want to normalize that experience for them. Now, the next piece we have is, what the heck is going on with your kiddo or us when we're anxious? So we call this section your brain on anxiety. And Tanya and I at the Institute of Child Psychology always teach about what happens in the brain when you're dealing with anything mental health or parenting related, because we teach a lot of parenting courses as well. And my view on this is, you need to understand what's going on with your kiddo so you know how to respond. And you have to know when you are getting anxious or you're getting angry, what's going on and why you respond the way you do, and how to maybe curb that response when it's not helpful. So we're going to use something called the brain and hand model. And it was developed by Dr. Daniel Siegel. And it simplifies really the brain and breaks it into 3 parts. So we're going to say this is your brain here. And here is your spinal cord. Here is something called the brain stem. And the center, we're going to have the limbic system, which is the emotional brain. And there are 2 knuckles there that I want you to remember. One would be the amygdala, and one is the hippocampus. So those are super important. We're going to come back to that in a second. And if we put our fingers over top, we have what is called the prefrontal cortex, or the cortical brain. It's an area it's right behind your eyes, and it's very thick in mammals in particular, especially primates and human beings. So your brain stem is in charge of you breathing, your autonomic nervous system, the things you don't have to think about. Your body's on autopilot. It just does these things. Your limbic system creates an emotional response. It stores our memories, and it's also the alarm system. It is like the smoke alarm of our body that tells us if we're in danger or not. And the amygdala is what is causing the anxiety really in your child. It is the alarm that goes off that makes them anxious. And over top of that, we have the thinking brain. Now, the prefrontal cortex is all about logic. Teachers call this executive functioning skills, critical thinking skills. This part of the brain is really about logic and reasoning. It's about emotion regulation. It's the part of you that slows you down to not scream at your child even though you're angry. It's the part of our brain that has allowed us to build amazing things like computers and skyscrapers and airplanes. Now, this part of the brain is very, very underdeveloped in small children. It basically doesn't even start to fill in. It's kind of like a shell. It doesn't really fill into our kids are at least 5 to 7 years of age. And it's not done growing till we're close to 30. So this may explain a few things of your high school or your junior high days when you were quite impulsive and didn't always make great decisions. Now, when kids get anxious, what happens is they think of something that maybe scares your child. I'll use a benign example. Maybe something that makes me a little anxious is I had a car accident once, and semi-trucks on the highway make me a little bit anxious. So what happens is my central nervous system, it works with all our 5 senses in our body, sees a semi-truck driving beside me. I'm going to come up beside the semi-truck on the highway. This part of our brain is going to send that information. I'm going to start to have a bit of a reaction because I'm seeing this semi-truck coming up. I'm feeling the steering wheel. I'm feeling the seat underneath me. And it sends this information up to my amygdala. And my amygdala in my limbic system says, here's some information for you about your environment. There's this big thing coming your way. Is there a memory that exists in this emotional brain that matches this scene that would say, maybe I should be scared right now? And like I prefaced, I had a car accident last year with a semi-truck. So yes, my hippocampus is like, yes, there's a match. This is something that's going on that we should be scared of. So our central nervous system, our brainstem, and our limbic system work together, and we have an emotional reaction to what's going on. We have, our heart starts beating faster. The blood starts flowing to our extremities because that is called something called fight, flight, freeze, collapse. We are getting ready to run away or fight from something, or freeze to process what's going on, or play dead, depending on which subsection we're looking at. And it's all about, I need you to survive. This is scary. This could harm you. And so this is called the downstairs brain. The limbic system and the brainstem work together and say, this is called scared. And it sends that information, that word, up to essentially our thinking brain. And the thinking brain goes, aha, this is not a time for me to come in and to start rationally thinking about what we should do next. He checks out. The prefrontal cortex checks out. We see reduced connectivity between the emotional brain, the downstairs brain, and the upstairs brain. And in psychology, we call this flipping your lid, which means now we're just about survival. We're not about thinking rationally, because your brain has got better things to do, which is to keep you alive. So this is where instincts will pop in. Your past experiences would tell me I need to either slow down or speed up. I should avoid the semi or speed out of there to get ahead of him. And my body's going to have that reaction because it has found a memory before that would say this is a threat. And does that mean the semi's going to hurt me? Absolutely not. How many times in my life have I passed semis where I haven't been in an accident? But because something happened, I have that memory there. I'm going to try to avoid what has gone on. Okay, so that's just something to stimulate that process of the fight, flight, freeze, collapse response. So, and when we flip our lid. So in that moment, when my lid is flipped, I'm probably not going to be able to do a math equation. I'm probably not going to even remember my middle name. And so hopefully it makes sense to you that when children essentially get anxious, their executive functioning center, which is also in charge of language, is severely underdeveloped anyway. So a lot of talking is unavailable to them even when the lid is on. But when the lid comes off, because they're having an anxious response, they aren't able to be reasoned with. So hopefully that makes sense. And we have a hard time reasoning with our kids too when we're in a reactive, angry, emotional state, because this happens with all of our big emotions when we flip our lid. The second piece is the right and left brain, which would also explain your frustration probably in trying to reason with your child when they're anxious. The right hemisphere, because the brain is broken into 2 hemispheres. The right hemisphere is all about empathy. It is all about being able to be artistic, to see the whole picture. And the left hemisphere is all about logic and linear and language. It is really like the engineer of our brain, the lawyer of our brain. And the right side is more like the artist of our brain. And the 2 should work together to form an experience that make us up as human beings, essentially. But when kids are emotional, and kids naturally tend to go to the right hemisphere. We know this because kids tend to be more emotional and creative and empathic and all about their bodies than they are about logic and linear and analysis that kind of comes later on. Yet when we have a child who's very anxious, we often find ourselves saying things like, "What's wrong? Why did you do that? What is the big deal?" And we're trying to reason with them. And all this does is cause frustration in kids because they are actually in the right hemisphere of the brain when they're emotional, not the left hemisphere of their brain. So what we want to try to do is talk to our kids through the right hemisphere, which is like speaking their language. Going in through the left hemisphere is like speaking Latin to them, and they're just going to get more and more frustrated. So our first mistake is we try to talk to our kids when their lid is flipped, which their logical and reasoning skills are out the doors. And the second part is we try to use logic through the left hemisphere and lots of questions versus talking through the right hemisphere, which means you're probably missing their emotional experience, because when they're in the right hemisphere, it's really about the body and emotions. This slide is just kind of representing something called the fight, flight, freeze, collapse response. And in this particular picture, you see a lion chasing a gazelle. And this is about when we flip our lid, we go into that response, which is fight, flight, freeze, collapse. It means our amygdala has hijacked us in order to keep us safe. So if you were a gazelle, for instance, you would be grazing on the savannah and quite peacefully with your herd. And then imagine you as a gazelle smell a lion. You don't know if it's there, but you think you smell something. The first thing a gazelle is probably going to do is pop their head up. They're going to pop their head up and going to stop what they're doing. They're going to freeze just to assess, is the environment safe? Second thing the gazelle is going to do is probably when it sees the lion coming out of the tall grass to hunt it, is going to run and hide. If it can't hide, it's just going to run. It's going to get the heck out of Dodge. It doesn't want to be eaten, so it runs away. So that's your flight response. The next thing that happens is if the lion catches the said gazelle, it will try to fight for its life to get away from the lion if it can. And the fourth response, which often is missed in terms of trauma and anxiety, is something called the collapse response, which means when we think that everything we've done is completely futile and we have no other options, our body starts to shut down and it goes into shock. And we do something called dissociating. In the animal kingdom, we sometimes call that playing possum, playing dead, because from a predator-prey, from an evolutionary point of view, if we play dead, maybe the predator that's about to eat us won't, because we look like we're already dead or sick. And the second thing is that it could basically numb us out so we don't feel ourselves being eaten, because that's what going into shock really does. It numbs us out. So those are kind of your four responses. Now, I want you to think about the child you work with. Maybe that's your child, your stepchild, your grandchild, your student in your class. When they get anxious, they probably do one of those four things. They either run away, they want to avoid, so that's a flight response. They fight, they get argumentative, they get rigid, they have tantrums, they hit, they kick, they bite. They freeze, they won't talk to you, their eyes get wide and they don't know what to say. No matter what you say, they kind of shut down. And the collapse response could mean fainting. It doesn't usually mean that, but that's a complete checking out where they are like gone. We call that dissociative. So you'll see them looking off like they're daydreaming. They are just unavailable to you physically, emotionally. They are just out. And that isn't as common, but it does definitely happen, especially with kids with trauma, is the collapse response. Again, in psychology, you can look it up. It's called dissociation. So now you know a little bit about anxiety. You know that it serves a purpose. It's trying to keep us safe. When we get anxious, we go into our right hemisphere. We flip our lid, which is why we can't reason with kids. And this flipping of our lid serves an evolutionary purpose, which is survival, which is that fight, flight, freeze, collapse response. We are meant to hide, to fight, to collapse, to run away from things that make us anxious, that cause us fear. The problem is the amygdala, this part of the brain here, the smoke alarm of the brain essentially, can be kind of a sloppy processor and sometimes overgeneralizes, and instead of going off when there's an actual fire in the house, it goes off just because there's burnt toast. It often can't tell the difference between a real threat and we call that a benign threat, something that's less threatening. At the end of the day, some kids have a more sensitive amygdala than other kids, and that can be for a variety of reasons. Maybe they had there was a divorce recently in the home. Maybe there was something that had happened to them. Maybe it's genetic and mom and dad have anxiety, so they have a predisposition to anxiety. I go into this a lot more in our full course about where this could be coming from. But either way, we're teaching kids that amygdala is trying to keep us safe. And unfortunately, it's going off when there's burnt toast and there isn't really a threat. So our first strategy in dealing with the anxiety is something called attunement. And attunement is all about relationship. Remember, I said earlier on that we want to use our relationship with kids to help remedy the anxiety. Because at the end of the day, relationship is the number one way through mental health outcomes. And that's because we are designed as mammals to be in relationship with our tribe, there is safety in numbers. And we need connection. And we know when we look at studies of resilience, the difference between a child who struggles and those who overcome often have to do with the quality of relationships in that child's life. And children, unfortunately, for us, without a good relationship, don't learn very well. Because if kids are in a good relationship with the adult who's supposed to be taking care of them, they don't feel there's trust. And then that amygdala is going off again, because kids are supposed to be taken care of by warm, caring, compassionate adults who have got it, who can handle it. And if we're not that person, it becomes very difficult to do a deep breathing exercise with a child if they don't believe you're competent, if they don't believe that you're trustworthy, and they don't believe that essentially that you really care about them. So the number one tool I give people at my seminars, no matter where I travel in the world, is attunement is by far your number one strategy in dealing with any mental health issue. You have to connect with these kids. And this is through something called, like I said, attunement. And really, remember that right hemisphere is all about emotion, right? It's all about emotion. So what you want is to connect that emotion in that child when their right hemisphere is firing. I'm anxious, I'm anxious, I'm anxious. We have to tune into that and understand how that feels with us. We have to recognize the anxiety, understand that, yeah, this probably makes me anxious too, or I can remember a time I felt anxious like that. This is called empathy. You have to draw on time you felt that way. It's not just feeling bad for your child. That's actually going to make your child feel worse. We don't want to do that. We want to use empathy, not sympathy. Sympathy is feeling bad for someone. Empathy is aligning with their story and understanding how they feel based on something we perhaps have felt, or we can at least imagine feeling that way. So we tune into what's going on in our body or in our mind or a time we felt that way. We notice how our child is feeling, and then we use something like what we call right brain connection. You're so scared right now. Or you're really nervous about that test tomorrow, huh? That's a really big feeling. Or you're so frustrated right now. This is so hard for you to do. And so maybe they're struggling with a new skill or something. Because, frustration and anxiety often come hand in hand because things aren't working for them. And I know it sounds simple, but rather than trying to reason with these kids and say, why, it didn't bother you tomorrow. Look at those other kids. They're not scared. That's just going to shame them. We want to use that right hemispheric connection. And Dr. Daniel Siegel says we always connect, then you redirect. So we always connect with kids first, name the emotion that they're feeling, feel it in our body. We have to be okay with the anxiety, by the way. So if I don't have a lot of experience dealing with anxiety well, I really suggest you find someone to talk to, because it will be hard with you to stay attuned to your child if your anxiety is completely debilitating you. So I say like attachment just means relationship. When you're in relationship with your child or the child you work with, it just doesn't have to be parents and kids. It can be anytime we have a relationship with a child. Children need an adult in their lives who will let them explore the world and who also is there when they fall apart. And so sometimes kids are anxious because the parent doesn't want to let them explore the world. That parent has got anxiety. That parent maybe tends to be a bit of a helicopter parent. They're always buzzing around, constantly worried something bad is going to happen. Or on the other flip side of things, maybe you're a parent or maybe you know someone who's like this, who isn't available to your child, and that child's allowed to explore, but emotionally you're just not there to catch them when they fall. You've got other stuff going on, or maybe you're really uncomfortable with large displays of emotion. Like you said, you just got other stuff going on and you feel yourself being really preoccupied a lot of the time. You know, with kids, if the rope's too tight, imagine your child climbing a wall, like a rock climbing wall, and you're there spotting them. So you're at the bottom and you have this harness attached to you. What should happen is that child should be able to feel you there, but still be able to climb up the wall. There's enough slack in the rope that they can get up the wall. At the same time, they can, if they fall, you'll catch them because there's still, again, there's enough there. There's not too much slack that if they fall, you will be able to grab the rope and they'll hang there and they'll be a little scared, but they're not going to hit the floor. So what we need to do as caregivers is part of attunement in healthy relationship is let go of the anxiety to let our kids make mistakes and fall down and let them do this. But when they fall apart, we have to be there to do that attunement piece and help pick up the pieces. We have to be emotionally available to our kids. And this is what I mean by it's all about relationship. Without this dance, this attachment dance, this what we call secure attachment, and feel free to Google the crap out of the word secure attachment. You will find loads and loads and loads and loads of information on this. Without that secure attachment, it becomes very difficult for children to find the safety that they need in order to remedy and work through their anxiety. So this attunement and also your ability to let your child explore, make mistakes, play, do all kinds of things without us constantly rescuing them is very, very important. So how do we do that right brain connection? Well, it's called empathy. And there's really quick steps to what you can do. You label the emotion. I see you're worried about school. And then you can even label how they're feeling in their body. I can see, your face is so red. You're so mad at me right now. Or your hands are shaking. I can see that. And your legs are shaking. And we can say something like, you know what? Everybody gets anxious. It's really normal to feel worried sometimes. And it's okay to feel that way. And I know I was never told that as a kid. And I think I needed to hear that. So I would really hope that encourage parents and caregivers and professionals to tell kids that. And then moving close, the right brain, the part that's anxious, really loves proximity. And yes, some angry kids don't like being touched. So you don't have to give them a full-on hug, but just move in a little closer. Just lean in. Show proximity. Say, I'm here for you. And then just listen. We're really quick to want to talk to fix it. And that left brain is not ready for you to do that. Their kids remember, they're in their right brain and they're in the downstairs brain, not in the logical linear part of the brain. So our job is to just listen to our kids and let them just kind of do what they need to do, essentially. So here's some examples, some things you can do. Wow, that was really scary. Everyone gets scared, even grown-ups, even though everything worked out, I know you were really worried. And then you can also do something called reflecting, which is simply stating back what your child said to you, kind of paraphrasing what they're saying can help, especially teens, indicates to them that you were listening to what they had to say. So you could say something like, yeah, so I'm hearing you don't want to go to school tomorrow. You're really worried because last time you went to school, those girls didn't want to include you at lunchtime. Am I hearing you correct? So that's one way you can reflect and kind of ask for clarification. Here are some things that, that are hard for kids to hear. I think they're hard for all of us to hear. This would be very dismissing. The messages that your feelings aren't right. And you have to be alone in your anxiety. You have to be alone in your fear. And things might be, stop crying. Nobody else is afraid. What's wrong with you? We're just going to go home if you can't do this. No, you're fine. Get over it. Those are things that are going to make children start to second guess their feelings. And granted, you may think what they're scared of is absolutely ridiculous, but at the end of the day, your child's feelings are just as valid as your own. And maybe their behavior isn't always on par, but understand that the feeling is always okay. We can feel how we want to feel. All feelings should be allowed, but we don't get to do whatever we want to do. That's what I tell my 3 and my 5-year-old. And then the second piece here is communicate to that right hemisphere. Daniel Siegel calls this name it to tame it, using, if you can, those emotional words. So that's that right hemisphere. Strategy 2, reframing. This is psychoeducation is your friend. So remember that we talked about what happens, we flip our lid. So I would really encourage teaching your child about the lid flipping, and you can YouTube this. YouTube brain in hand model. You can hear Daniel Siegel talking about it. You can look at brain in hand model for kids. So we can teach the brain in hand model. And we also teach them that when we get anxious, that amygdala releases, it's actually in collaboration with pituitary gland and a few other places in the body and the brain. Our heart races, so it goes really fast. And that's to actually pump blood to our arms and our legs. So if there's a predator, we can run away or we can fight. We get dizzy because the oxygen gets really, really high in our body. So actually, when we calm down, we get more CO2 gets pumped in through our blood. We sweat so our bodies don't overheat. So it can make us hard to grab things. We get hot face, our temperature goes up. We can get stomach aches. Because when we are anxious, our body stops digesting food. So that's where we get the tummy aches. And sometimes we see issues, ulcers in the stomach and stuff. And kids also can lose control of their bladders too, which is normal. Just to say we want to get rid of everything in our body so it's more efficient for us to run away or to hide. And then the last part is the trembling, because kids will tremble. Their hands tremble and shake, their legs shake. And that muscle tension means we're getting ready to fight or run away. So we want to teach kids about what's happening in their bodies so they recognize ahead of time that that's what's coming up for us before it gets too big. And then what happens in the brain, we can label it. You can call it the anxious or worried brain, and then versus, so that this can be, the downstairs brain can be your worried brain, and the prefrontal cortex, don't call it that. You can call it the thinking brain, or the calm brain, the smart, rational, logical brain. That's where our thoughts hide out. So basically the amygdala that hangs out in the worried brain is like the protector. You can say it's like the watchdog of the brain, and it's really just trying to keep you safe. And I spent, a good hour with a teenager this morning talking about this, how her brain actually worked better than most kids because her amygdala was just so strong that it would probably keep her safe better than most kids. But unfortunately, it also tells her to respond when there isn't a fire. It's just burning toast, essentially. So it says, watch out, this is too hard, I can't do it. It comes up with phrases like that and can be quite bossy. And these false alarms, we can give the analogy of for instance, of a snake. We don't know if it's dangerous or not. We don't know what kind of snake it is, something scary to us. Our amygdala immediately says it's scary, even if we don't even know it's scary yet. It just jumps to conclusions really, really quickly. Gave you the analogy about the burnt toast. And we can talk about evolution. When we used to live in caves, when we were cavemen, there were things that could eat us. There were saber-toothed tigers. We lived outdoors. So there were storms that could get us, that could really harm us. And so our brains evolved essentially to be worried about these other things in the environment. So, or you can also call it a just in case first responder. So again, we have our amygdala can be like the watchdog. And here I'm going to give you a really quick narrative to use with body complaints. So you should be able to see that on your screen and in the handout in the workbook that you downloaded. And if you didn't already, you should have received a link for our workbook. We did include that in this online course. It's a beautiful workbook that our graphic designer made for this course. So you will have a copy of that narrative about body complaints. Strategy 3 is called hitting the brakes using the breath to calm. I know it sounds a cliche, but deep breathing works. The problem is people don't do it long enough. So when the stomach expands, so you do a deep breath in through your stomach, your stomach expands. it hits something called the vagal nerve in your spinal cord and sends a message basically up to your amygdala and says, whoa, 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 no worries, you can relax, because if there was something wrong, we'd be breathing really, really fast. And if we're breathing really, really fast, then that scary thing would be here. But since we're breathing slow, that means you can quit releasing all these stress hormones and we can just relax. So that's why deep breathing actually works. It's the expansion of the stomach that hits the vagal nerve that sends that message to our midbrain that says, like, we get to chill out. So there's different ways you can do this. You can have kids breathe in, just simply in through the nose, out through the mouth. You can do this with bubbles, where they hold the bubbles up to here and you breathe in through the nose, out through the mouth. You can do this with windmills. You get a little windmill from the dollar store and you, again, breathe in through the nose, out through the mouth, and watch it spin. You can put a cup on your stomach and have your child lay on the ground or on the bed and watch the stomach go up and down. You can also do that with a balloon under their shirt. You can have them put a hand on their chest and a hand on their belly. And we want to get the hand on the belly higher than the hand on their chest, because stressed breathing is breathing into your chest, and deep breathing means we breathe in through our stomach. You can also have where it's called a pizza breath if you have a young child, and we put the pretend pizza in front of them, and they breathe in through the nose, out through the mouth, and take a bite of their pizza. Another thing you can do is just simply get your teenager an app, like such a really good one I like is Calm, is a great app where they can listen to meditations, guided mindfulness, sounds of nature, and they can just practice their deep breathing right there. But understand that the deep breathing is one of the quickest ways to de-escalate the amygdala, the lower brain areas, and so the child goes out of that fight, flight, freeze, collapse response. But it's not going to work in 10 breaths, and we have to teach kids this, that the deep breathing is going to take time. And so what you'll often have to do is do the deep breathing with your child or teen. They will not sit and do it on their own. They might after you've done it 15 times, but kids are very in the moment and remember when they flip their lid, their executive functioning's offline, so their logical reasoning isn't there. So they don't think to try these strategies. You have to practice them over and over and over again before the child will start hitting, being like, oh yeah, this worked last time, I need to do it. But you can also Google tons of deep breathing activities to do with kids. Number 4 I want to give you is hitting the brakes using the body to calm. So we suggest one of the quickest ways, and again, I was talking to a teen about this literally this morning, was taking a break when she was having a panic attack in class and going into the handicap washroom in her high school and engaging in physical activity in order to stop the panic attack. I also gave her a paper bag to breathe into. Paper bags work for panic attacks because that increases the CO2 in your bloodstream, and it's the over-oxygenation of the blood that causes the panic attack. So just a quick tidbit there. So physical contact could be rocking, hugging, humming, gentle massage. I suggested to this girl that she do wall sits, lunges, running on the spot if she can, high knees. We also looked at bringing her knees to elbow to opposite knee, and then also do some stretching. Because that physical contact that parents can give is really great, because that releases some feel-good hormones and makes kids feel safe. And the exercise releases something called GABA, G-A-B-A. And that allows kids GABA is a neurotransmitter that signals to the pituitary gland and the amygdala that the parasympathetic nervous system should kick in. And I know those are a lot of big words, but it essentially means that the stress hormones aren't being produced anymore. So it basically turns the tap off of stress hormones. So exercise is really good for us when we're stressed out because it releases GABA, and GABA signals to the pituitary gland and the amygdala that we don't need to keep being so stressed out anymore. We can also encourage kids to jump, scream up and down, making exaggerated scared noises or moans. And this is simply because then you're working with the fight response. So we're teaching kids it's almost like you're having the body role play the fight. So then the brain is like, oh, I can relax now. I already fought off the bear. Another great one is fill the space around you. So you do this with kids who are elementary age, and they may not buy it after they're in, middle of high school. But it turns out opening your arms up really, really wide and crossing your legs and putting your head back reduces the production of stress hormones. And closing your body with your arms crossed and your head forward increases the stress hormones. So I always say to kids, we want to open up calm, not invite in stress. We want to open it up and release the stress. So that's something you can do. Direct. So this is number 5 I want to give you. Direct your child to new thinking. We always get the body deactivated before we go into this. So do deep breathing, get the body calm, and then start to change what the child thinks. So you have to go in through the body and the breath first, then you go on to the thinking piece. Okay, it's a mistake a lot of people make, even therapists make, is they try to change the thinking, and unfortunately you need to calm the body first, and then you can start to change the thinking. So working with the thinking brain, children, give me 5. Think of 5 calming thoughts, and they can trace it out with their finger. You can also have them write a new story about the anxiety. So kids are great storytellers. So you can have them tell a story about the thing they're worried about happening. Maybe it's going to school and getting bullied. And instead, after you've written the full story of maybe a time that it did happen, have them write it in a new way with a new ending, and have them rehearse or play out that new story. And then maybe get some helpers on your side, like a teacher or a counselor, to help remedy that. For teens and tweens, you could also use the Give Me 5 strategy. Give it a test, which means anxiety thoughts are often black or white, which means they're very, very, very exaggerated thoughts. So what I often do is kind of get into an argument with teens about whether their thoughts are rational or not. So we give it a test. And we say, I know your amygdala is trying to keep you safe, but remember that watchdog is really overreactive. So because of this, let's have a debate about this thought you're having. So you say that nobody likes you. Can you tell me about a time that you went to a birthday party? Can you tell me about a time someone sat with you or someone smiled at you? And parents, you'd have to help them out. A time maybe they had a sleepover with someone. So again, they say no one likes them, but chances are that's not true. Now, granted, I wouldn't run into this until I've done lots of work on validating, I've worked with the body, etc. We don't want to invalidate the fact that the child really feels like no one likes them. So we definitely would say something like, it sounds really lonely when you feel that way, or you sound really sad, or it feels very rejecting, whatever that word is you want to use for what that child is feeling. But again, we're going to calm the child using the body, the breath, proximity, attunement, and then we're going to do this. The other thing you can do is worst case scenario. And I use this one today with a teenager. Instead, most of the time kids don't know really what the worst case is that they're dealing with. Today when I worked with a client, she was talking about getting laughed at school if she did a presentation in front of the class. And for her, it turns out when we talked about what the worst case was, she just didn't like being stared at by everybody. So I said, well, whether you don't get, you worried about getting stared at or laughed at, how are you going to deal with if that happens? Everybody judging you or whatever it is you're worried about. So let's say worst case scenarios, you give the presentation and they don't like it and they laugh. What are we going to do to handle that? And for her, she said that she would call her mom, that she knows she has a friend in the class that would never do that. So she would lean on her. She would go for a walk and practice some of the deep breaths that we did, or go to the bathroom and do some of the exercises, and know that she only has to do the presentation once in the whole year. So, she had some self-talk that we had written down, so she knew how to coach herself. She did the 5. What are the 5 things we can do? And we actually practice these things. We practice doing some of the exercises in session. So make sure you practice this stuff with your kids and teens.